Okay, so what did we find, and what's interesting, and what? Well, I guess I can encapsulate before I go into a bit of detail, encapsulate it in saying that water actually contains energy. We don't think of water containing energy, but we have evidence that water contains energy, even direct evidence for that. And how does this come about? Well, first thing, one of the findings that I think is really important. We started doing experiments based on Gilbert Ling's ideas. We didn't know any better, and we were novices coming from a different field. And Gilbert Ling's idea that the water is inside the cell is structured means it's like a crystal. Now, crystals have a tendency to be pure. So, for example, ice. So, if you take water that has contaminants in it, the water will push out to become ice. Ice is a pure crystal. To gain purity, it's got to get rid of all of those impurities. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a pure crystal. So, as ice forms from the water, it pushes out the contaminants, solutes of various sorts. And so we're thinking we're looking for somehow a preparation that contains water where particles or molecules are pushed out. In other words, they're not there. Uh, and we found it quickly. We found it right next to. We started using gels, and we put the gel. It's a chunk of gel into water, and the water contained particles, microspheres, little tiny spheres that are suspended in the water. And we looked in the microscope, and we saw that there was a region right adjacent to the gel that contained no microspheres. And we watched it, and progressively that region grew bigger and bigger. It kept pushing out microspheres, and it wound up to be a very substantial size. We thought maybe this is what Gilbert Ling was talking about. Maybe this is a region, a liquid crystalline region where there's order, and because there's order, it gets rid of particles. And we spent several years looking at all different kinds of properties, and indeed, it was true that the properties of this kind of water, we called it first exclusion zone water because it excluded. So exclusion zone, easy to remember in the US anyway. EZ doesn't work as well. Easy. And later, when we knew more about it, we realized that's not a great name, although it stuck. Fourth phase is maybe more appropriate. So one of the principal findings was that this region was not neutral. Now, Gilbert Ling's idea that water molecules are organized, water molecules are neutral. You can stack water molecules, from here to the moon, and you'll never get negative charge. But we found experimentally by sticking electrodes directly into this region that it was negatively charged. So Gilbert Ling, unfortunately, couldn't be right in the exact interpretation of how this structure is, and since it had negative charge, we looked for, you're starting with water molecules which are neutral, and you find a region of negative charge, and therefore, it goes without saying that you need to find another region with positive charge, because the positive charges can't just vanish. You have to have an equal number of positive charges as negative charges, because it all starts from neutrality. So we found where the positive charges were. They were immediately adjacent to this exclusion zone. So you have a gel that's right here, and next to the surface of the gel, you've got an exclusion zone, negative, and beyond that, in the water, ordinary water, you've got a lot of positive charges, a lot of protons or hydronium ions, if you will, which means you got a battery. You got a battery, you'd think, well, hey, wait a second. this is a battery made of water. Um, you can demonstrate that it's a battery. You just take two electrodes, which we did, one in the negative, one in the positive, and you connect it to a load. We connected it to a LED, a light emitting diode, and voila, you can light the LED. So uh, demonstrably, it means that it's got energy. The water somehow breaks up into negatively charged exclusion zone fourth phase water and positively charged ordinary water. And okay, so that's different from what Gilbert Ling had found, and we were naturally excited to find that. However, the question arose, if you got a battery, everybody knows that batteries need to get charged, right? You can take your cell phone, and if you forget to plug it in during the night, the next morning you can't communicate with your cell phone. So, but this is a generality. Whenever you have a battery, you need to charge it or recharge it or whatever. So the question arose, well, where does the energy come from? And we couldn't figure it out. That's another reason why I've lost a lot of hair. I was scratching. Couldn't figure it out. And one day, it was an undergraduate student who was working in the lab who figured it out for us. So he's sitting at the lab bench or standing at the lab bench. This was a tall bench, and he had a chamber with a gel in it or polymer. I don't remember. I think we began using the polymer Nafion, which gave rise to very nice, stable exclusion zones. So we used it a lot. And he's playing with it, looking at the exclusion zone. And I don't remember what the intent of his experiment was, but he found a lamp right next to him. It was one of those gooseneck lamps, and he picked up the lamp and he shined it on the chamber. And he called me in to see what he'd found. And what he found is that the region of the exclusion zone that was illuminated, it grew like crazy. So I came in and I said, wow, this is really quite an observation. Why don't you remove the lamp or turn it off and let's see what happens? And so he did. And that region that had greatly expanded retracted back to its initial. It took some tens of minutes, but it looked like it was reversible. So it didn't take a rocket scientist. This is middle school stuff. You shine the lamp, light, and light is building it. So maybe light, photons are responsible for the energy. And of course, you think about plants then. You think about photosynthesis and such, and indeed, I think that what we found is perhaps directly related to the first step of photosynthesis, the splitting of water's charge into positive and negative through light. So it has direct relevance, I believe.